Chapter 2. Pontius Pilate. In a white cloak, with blood-colored lining wave, shuffling with a cavalryman walk, onto the balcony of the roofed colonnade, which connected the two wings in the place of Herod the Great, on that early morning, 14th day of spring month Nisan, appeared the procurator of Judea, Pontius Pilate. The procurator loathed rose oil odor more than anything else in the world. The day seemed to be spoiled, as this smell had been following the procurator since the very dawn. Procurator felt rosy smell from the cypresses and palms in the garden, from his kin, from his escort. The smoke spread throughout upper landing in the garden from the outhouses belonging to the 12th Latin Legio First Cohortes, which had come up to Jerusalem with the procurator. A bitter smoke heralded a cooked dinner in the centuries, mixed with that very oily, rosy scent. Gods, why should I bear that punishment? It's undoubtedly incurable, terrible disease gymicranias, which causes pain to the half of the head. There is no relief, no remedy. I will try not to move it. Near the fountain, on the mosaic floor, a chair was prepared. The procurator sat down, not looking at anybody, and moved his hand aside. The secretary respectfully put a piece of parchment into his hand. Procurator couldn't prevent himself from grimacing painfully. He gave a brief look through the paper, passed it back to the secretary, and toughly said, "Suspected from Galilee? Did Tetrarch see it?" "Yes, procurator," answered secretary. "What was his conclusion?" "He refused to make conclusions and sent the sentence from Synedrion to your approval," explained secretary. Procurator twitched his cheek and ordered in a low voice, "Bring the accused." Procurator saw a person of 27 years in front of him, who was accompanied by two legionnaires from the landing in the garden to the balcony. That person was in an old, ragged, light blue tunic. His head was tied with a white band and a thorn round his forehead. His hands were bound behind his back. There was a big black eye on the left side of his face, and his mouth corner was coagulated with blood scratch. He was looking at the procurator with alarming curiosity in his eyes. The latter kept silent, then quietly asked in Hebrew, "So, it was you who provoked people to ruin the temple in Jerusalem?" Uttering these words, the procurator was sitting like a rock. Only his lips were slightly moving. Procurator seemed to be a rock, as if he was afraid of moving his head overhead. A person with the bound hands drew forward and spoke. "Good man, believe me," the procurator interrupted him without raising his voice. "Do you call me a good man? You are wrong. Everybody here considers me to be a monster, and this is quite true," he added monotonously. "Centurion Kileratus." It seemed to everybody that it became darker on the balcony when the chief of a special century mark, nicked Kileratus, appeared in front of the procurator. Kileratus was a head higher, of the tallest legio soldier, and so broad-shouldered that completely closed sunlight. Procurator addressed him in Latin. "Criminal calls me a good man. I give you some minutes to explain to him how he should talk to me. But don't cripple him." Everybody watched Mark Kileratus, except motionless procurator, who waved to the arrested man to follow the soldier. Whenever he appeared, Kileratus was always accompanied with the glances because of his height. Those who saw him for the first time paid attention to his face, as it was disfigured. His nose was smashed with the German club. Mark's heavy boots were clinking on the mosaic floor. The bound person followed him noiselessly. Complete silence fell in the air. One could hear doves cooing on the landing near the balcony and whimsical tenors singing in the fountain water. Procurator got a sudden urge to rise, put his temple under the water, and stood still. However, he knew it wouldn't help. Coming into the garden, Hilariatus took a whip from the hands of the leger soldier, standing near like a bronze statue. Lightly swinging, he bat the shoulders of the arrested person. Centurion's movement was loose and casual, but the bound person fell down as if his feet were chopped. He choked with air, his face left color, eyes lost conscious expression. Mark hitched a person up with his left hand so easily as if he took an empty sack, put him onto feet, and spoke nasally, carelessly articulating Aramaic words. Call Roman Procurator Hegemon. No other words. Stand still. Do you understand? If not, I'll beat you. The prisoner staggered, but he pulled himself together, breathed, and uttered hoarsely. His face got its color. I got you. Don't beat me. In a half of a minute, he was in front of the procurator again. A dull, bored voice sounded. What's your name? Mine? Hardly asked the wretched prisoner, showing all his eagerness to answer any question, not to provoke bursts of anger. The procurator pronounced rather quietly. I know mine. Don't pretend sillier than you are. Name of yours. Joshua, answered the prisoner fast. Surname? Hanotri. Where did you come from? I'm from Hamala, replied the prisoner, showing with his head upright, somewhere to the north, where city Hamala was lying. Who are you by birth? I don't know for sure, vividly said the person. I don't remember my parents. Once they told me my father was a Syrian. Where do you live? I don't have a constant residence, timidly responded the prisoner. I travel to different cities. Let's put it in other words. You're a tramp, noted procurator, and asked, do you have any relative? Not a soul. I'm alone in the world. Can you read or write? Yes, I do. Do you speak any other language besides Hebrew? Yes, Greek. Swollen eyelid got up. A dim, suffering eye glared at the arrested person. The other eye was closed. Procurator spoke Greek. Were you going to destroy the temple and inspired people to do it? Here the prisoner got alive again. His eyes didn't look scared, and he spoke Greek. Good. Here fear crossed his face. After this word, he understood that he nearly escaped to make a mistake. Hegemon, I have never wanted to ruin the temple, and I haven't encouraged anybody to do such an absurd action. The secretary looked astonished. He was bending over a low table and writing everything. He raised his head, but at the very moment bowed to the parchment. Masses of people come up to the city for the holiday. There are magicians, astrologers, fortune-tellers, and murderers among them. Procurator was talking slowly. Sometimes you can come across with the liars. So you are a liar. It's written. Encourage people to ruin the temple. People witnessed it. These good people, started the prisoner and added hurriedly, Hegemon, and Raton, didn't learn anything and misunderstood everything I used to say. I'm afraid this muddle will keep on for a long time. The reason for that is wrong interpretation of my words. There fell silence. Tired eyes looked at the prisoner. I repeat for the last time, stop pretending insane, lunatic. pronounced Pilate monotonously. You've said a little, but the thing which has been written is enough to have you hanged. No, no, Hegemon tried to reassure the prisoner. There is the one who is constantly following me and writing. Once I read his parchment and was shocked. I never said anything of the things he wrote. I begged him, burn your parchment for God's sake, but he snatched it from my hands and ran away. Who is he? Asked Pilate with disgust touching his temple. Levi Matvey, willingly explained the prisoner. He used to be a tax collector. I met him on my way to Bethphage and talked to him at the corner of a fig garden. At first he was hostile and even humiliated me. Well, he thought he did so by calling me an ass, grinned the prisoner. I don't see anything offensive in this animal. The secretary stopped writing and glared silently at the procurator. Listening to me, he changed, kept on Joshua. He threw his money on the ground and made up his mind to travel with me. Pilate ironically bared yellow teeth and uttered, turning to the secretary. This city, you won't believe your ears. Do you hear? Tax collector threw his money away. Being unaware of the correct reply, the secretary repeated Pilate's smile. He said that he hated money since that moment, explained Joshua Levis Matvey strange actions. Since then, he's been my companion. Procurator glared at the arrested man with a grin, then at the sun steadily rising over the equestrian hippodromic status located far to the right from the palace. Suddenly, in a torture, he thought to banish the strange bandit out of the balcony and pronounce, hang him. Banish the escort, leave the colonnade, stay in a dark room, lie on a couch, ask for cold water, call his dog Banga, complain of hemicranias. A seducing idea of poisoning occurred to Procurator's mind. He looked at the arrested person with his dim eyes and kept silent for some time, trying hard to recollect why this merciless blaze of the sun in Jerusalem that morning made that crippled person appear. What other useless questions should he ask? You say Levi Matvey? Hoarsely asked a suffering person and closed his eyes. Yes, Levi Matvey. He heard high, torturing voice, piercing his mind. What did you say about the temple in the market? The voice seemed to prick Pilate's temple, touched immensely, and that voice sounded. Hegemon, I was saying about destruction of the temple of old belief and the birth of the temple of the truth. I put it that way for better understanding. Why did you tramp, make chaos in people's minds in the market? Why did you talk of the truth which you don't know? What is the truth? The procurator thought, oh gods, I asked something absolutely absurd at trial. My mind refuses to serve me any longer. He fancied a bowl with dark liquid. Poison, give me poison. He heard. The truth is that you have a headache, and it is so strong that you coldly and secretly dream of death. You can hardly speak or see. Now I am your unwilling executor. It makes me sad. You can hardly manage to bring your thoughts in order and dream only of your dog to come up. Evidently, it is the only creature in the world you are devoted to. But your headache torments will finish soon. The secretary rolled his eyes at the prisoner and didn't write the words up to the end. Pilate raised his meteoric eyes upon the arrested man and noticed that the sun was high over the hippodrome. Its light broke into the colonnade and moved to Joshua's sandals, and he tried to escape the sun. The procurator rose from the chair, squeezed his head with his hands, and his yellowish face expressed horror. He suppressed it with his will and dropped into the chair. The prisoner continued his speech. The secretary didn't write anything more. He was all ears in order not to lose a single word. "Well, it's all over now," said the prisoner, looking at Pilate in a friendly way. "I'm glad. Hegemon, I would advise you to leave the palace for some time and walk on foot in the vicinity. For example, in the garden on Mount Elena. Thunderstorm will begin," turned the prisoner, narrowing his eyes at the sun. "By the evening. A walk would do a lot of good to you. I would accompany you with great pleasure. Some new ideas have occurred to me, and I suppose you will find them interesting. So I'd like to share them with you, because you make an impression of a very intelligent person." The secretary's cheek went mortally pale, and he dropped the scroll on the floor. "Your problem," kept on an unstoppable prisoner, "is in your isolated, reserved life. Besides, you have lost faith in people. I suppose it is difficult to be devoted only to a hound. Your life is poor, Hegemon." The speaker let himself smile. The secretary doubted if he should believe his ears or he should not. He had to believe. He tried to fancy what queer way the procurator's fiery mood would pounce upon an insolent prisoner. Also, he knew procurator quite well, but he couldn't foresee that. Everybody heard a strange house procurator's voice in Latin. "Untie his hands." One of the escort legio soldiers knocked his lance, handed it to another, came up and took off the bonds. The secretary took the scroll, having made up his mind neither taking notes nor being astonished. "Tell me," said Pilate softly in Greek, "are you a great physician?" "No, procurator, I am not a physician," replied the prisoner, rubbing his twisted, swollen purple wrist with pleasure. Staring from under his brows, Pilate was piercing the prisoner, but his eyes weren't misted any longer. Everybody recognized familiar sparkles in them. "I haven't asked you yet," said Pilate. "Perhaps you know Latin?" "Yes, I do," answered the prisoner. Procurator's yellow cheeks got flushed, and he asked in Latin, "How did you guess I wanted to call my dog?" "It's very simple," answered the prisoner in Latin. "You moved your head through the air," he repeated Pilate's gesture, "as if petting, and your lips?" "Yes," said Pilate. "Yes." They were silent. Pilate asked in Greek, "So you are a physician?" "No," eagerly responded the prisoner. "Believe me, I'm not a physician." "Well, if you want it to be a secret, let it be. It does not matter for our case. So, you still insist you have never encouraged people to ruin or burn or do anything to destroy the temple?" "Hegemon, I repeat, I haven't summoned anybody to such action. Do I look weak-minded?" "Oh no, you don't look like a weak-minded," quietly replied the procurator and smiled with a devilish smile. "So do swear it has never occurred." "What would you like me to swear with?" asked the unbound prisoner. "With your own life," replied the procurator. "It's high time for you to swear with it, because it's hanging by a thread." "Do you suppose you're the only one who has drawn it up, Hegemon?" asked the prisoner. "If you do, you're mistaken." Pilate shuddered and noted through his teeth. "I can cut that thread." "You're mistaken again," objected slightly the prisoner, shadowing from the sun. "You should know that only the one who has drawn the thread can cut it." "Well, well, well," said Pilate, grinning. "Now I understand why these corner men have been following you in Jerusalem. I have no idea who has drawn your tongue, but it's drawn quite well. By the way, tell me, is it true that you have entered Jerusalem through the gates of Susa riding the donkey and surrounded by the mass of rebels who have greeted you as a prophet?" pointed the procurator to the parchment. The prisoner gave the procurator a puzzled look. "I don't have any donkey, Hegemon," said he. "I've come to Jerusalem through the gates of Suzy, but on foot, and accompanied only by Levi Matvey, though nobody have greeted me, as nobody has known me here that time." "Are you acquainted with the Dismas, Hestus, and Barabbas?" Pilate followed his thoughts, staring at the prisoner. "I have never seen these good people," answered the prisoner. "Really?" "Really." "Now tell me, why do you say good people? Do you call everybody like that?" "Everybody," replied the prisoner. "There are no evil people in the world." "It is the first time I've heard it," grinned Pilate. "Maybe I've got a wrong conception of life." "No further notes," he addressed the secretary, though he had written nothing for some time, and turned back to the prisoner. "Have you read it out in some Greek book?" "No, it is my own idea." "Do you preach it?" "Yes, I do." "Here is Centurion Mark, named Kileratus. Is he good?" "Yes," replied the captured prisoner, "he is, but he is an unhappy human being. Since he has been disfigured by good people, his heart got tough and hard. I wonder what happened to him." "I was the witness of that event, and I can tell you," responded Pilate. "Good people attacked him as if he was a beast. The Germans clung to his neck, hands, legs. An infantry maniple ambushed. If a cavalry troop hadn't broken from the flank, where I was the commander, philosopher, you would have never talked to Kileratus. It was the battle of Edistaviza in the Valais region." "If I had a chance to talk to him," dreamily pronounced the prisoner, "I am sure he would change." "I suppose," the procurator responded, "it wouldn't please Legio Legate if it happened to you to talk to his officers. Fortunately, it would not happen, and I am the first who would take care of it." At that moment, a swallow darted into the arcade, circled under the golden ceiling, flew lower, almost brushed over the face of a bronze statue in a niche, and disappeared behind the column capital. Perhaps it was thinking of nesting there. Watching its flight, the procurator imagined he would examine vagrant philosopher Joshua's case, called Hanotri, and wouldn't find out his crime. In particular, he did not see any connection between Joshua's actions and disorders in Jerusalem. He would not set death sentence approved by Lesser Sanhedrin. However, considering that crazy utopic ideas might be the reason for the alarm in Jerusalem, the procurator would exile Joshua to Caesarea Stratonova in the Mediterranean, into Pilate's residence. He should only dictate this to the secretary. Swallows' wings sounded with sniff over the hegemon's head. The bird rushed to the fountain and flew away. The procurator looked at the prisoner and saw fire and swirling cloud of dust around him. "Again him? What else?" Pilate asked the secretary. "Unfortunately, no," unexpectedly replied the secretary, and handed another parchment to Pilate. "What is it?" frowned Pilate. Having read the document, his look changed. His skin changed from yellowish to red-brown color. Eyes seemed to collapse, either because of blood flowing to his neck and face, or because of something else. Something happened to the procurator's eyesight, and evidently it was caused by blood pressure pulsing in his temples. It seemed to him that the prisoner's head vanished, and another one appeared instead of it. This head was bald and crowned with a spiked golden diadem. A round smeared sore, a sunken toothless mouth with a capricious pendulous lower lip got up in front of him. Pilate was sensing the thick foliage of suppressed grass instead of pink columns. Roofscape in Jerusalem seemed to have vanished from his sight. It seemed to him his hearing also failed him, as he heard a distant sound of trumpets. mutedly and savagely. A nasal voice with arrogant intonation declared, Lex, Laser, Majestatis. There flew thoughts, short disorders, rapid thoughts. Perished. We are perished. One strange thought of immortality occurred to him. But why? And the thought of immortality aroused an unbearing sorrow. Pilate straightened up, put the fire of his eyes out, gazed at the balcony, and met prisoner's look. Look, Hanotri, began the procurator, staring in a strange way. His face was green, but there was a look which betrayed his anxiety. Do you ever say anything of the great Caesar? Answer. Do you say, or you don't? Pilate made the word don't slower than it should sound at trial, and gave Joshua some time to understand his look and idea. It is very easy and pleasant to tell the truth, noted the prisoner. I don't want to know, in a suppressed and angry tone replied Pilate, if it is pleasant or unpleasant for you. But you will have to say. But speaking, choose the proper words if you do not want to experience both inevitable and agonizing death. Nobody understood what happened to the procurator of Judea, but he let himself raise his hand as though shielding himself from the sun, and threw a prisoner a hinting glance behind his palm. So, spoke he, are you acquainted with the Judas of Kerioth, and what have you told him of the Caesar, if you ever have? It was like that, willingly began the prisoner. The day before yesterday I got acquainted with a young person near the temple, named Judas of Kerioth. He invited me to his place in the lower city, and treated me to... A good man? Asked Pilate, and a devilish sparkle flashed in his eyes. A very good and curious man, confirmed the prisoner. He was very interested in my ideas, and welcomed me joyfully. Lit the candles. Supporting the prisoner's speech, said procurator through his clenched teeth. His eyes glittered. Yes, answered Joshua in astonishment that the procurator was so well informed. He kept on. He asked me about my views upon the government. He showed a great interest in that question. What did you say? Asked Pilate. Would you answer that you have forgotten your thoughts since then? Pilate's voice sounded with some note of hopelessness. I was saying a lot of things. For example, spoke the prisoner, I said that any power abuses people. There will come the times when there won't be either power of Caesar's or any other power. A person will come to the kingdom of truth and justice. The need and power will come to an end. Go on. There is nothing more to say. Some people ran in, tied me up and threw me into a prison. The secretary quickly put down all the words. The world has never known the power greater and more perfect than the power of the Emperor Tiberius. Pilate's voice rose painfully and harshly. He looked at the secretary and asked with hatred, It is not your right, a criminal lunatic, to try to give your reasons upon it. Pilate cried, Send the escort away from the balcony. Turning to the secretary, he added, Leave me alone with the criminal. He is a treason case. The escort raised their lances and, knocking their colleague, marched to the garden, followed by the secretary. Silence was disturbed with the splashing water in the fountain. Pilate saw the water splaying out of the apex and dripping downwards. The prisoner was the first to break the silence. I see there is some trouble because of my conversation with that young man from Kerioth. I have a premonition something evil would happen to him. It is a pity for me. I think you should feel pity to another person, grinned the procurator. There is a person in the world whom you should pity more than Judas of Kerioth, and who would feel worse than Judas. Tell me, what do you think? Mikhail, a convinced executor, people who had beat you for preaching. The procurator pointed to the crippled face of Joshua. Robbers, Dismas Hestas who killed 4 soldiers, and the coward traitor Judas. Are they good people? Yes. There will come the kingdom of truth. It will come, Hegemon, pronounced Joshua. It will never come, cried Pilate in such a horrible voice that Joshua recoiled. Pilate used to cry like that a lot of years ago in the Valles Virgin. Kill them! Kill them! We captured giant Killeratus. He raised his parrot-trained voice, barking, Criminal! 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 So that it could be heard in the garden. Then he lowered his voice and asked, Joshua Hanotri, do you believe in any gods? There is only one God, replied Joshua, and I believe in him. Then pray to him. Pray as hard as you can. But still, Pilate's voice failed. It won't help. Do you have a wife? Asked Pilate in depression. No, I'm alone. I detest this city, mumbled the procurator, hunching his shoulders as if from cold, and wiping hands as if washing them. If you were murdered before meeting Judas, it would have been better. Let me go, Hegemon, unexpectedly asked the prisoner, and his voice got alarmed. I feel they will kill me. A spasm crossed Pilate's face. He turned his bloodshot eyes upon Joshua and said, Do you believe, humble thing, that the Roman procurator would release the person who said the things which you had? Goodness! Gods! Do you think I want to be in your position? These are your thoughts, not mine. Listen to me. If you ever dare to talk to anybody, utter a word, believe me. Beware, I warn you, beware. Hegemon, shut up! Shouted Pilate, watching the swallow appear on the balcony with a furious look. Come here, called he. When the secretary and the escort took their places, Pilate announced that he approved the death sentence of the letter Sanhedrin to Joshua Hanotri. The secretary wrote it down. In a minute, Mikhail appeared. The procurator ordered him to bring the criminal to the captain of secret service and communicate the procurator's words to him to keep Joshua separately from other prisoners. The captain was also forbidden to answer any question Joshua might ask. Mike gave a signal and the escort took Joshua away. Then a handsome man appeared. He was with a blond beard, with glittering lions muzzled on the breastplate and eagles feathering on the crest of the helmet. He had a gold-studded sword belt, triple-soled boots laced to his knee, and a purple cloak on his left shoulder. That was the legate Legio commander. The procurator asked him about the location of Sebastian cohorts. The legate responded that the Sebastians were on cordon on the square in front of the hippodrome, where the sentence would be announced. The procurator instructed the legate to take 2 centurions out of the Roman cohort. Killeratus would command one of them and escort the criminals, the carts with the executors, and the equipment to the cavalry. They would be on the upper cordon. The other one should be sent there immediately and be ready for a cordon. For this purpose, to make the mountain safe, the procurator asked the legate to send a Syrian Ela as a cavalry regiment for the escort purpose there. When the legate left the balcony, the procurator ordered the secretary to invite the president of the Sanhedrin, 2 members of the Sanhedrin, and the chief of the Jerusalem temple guard to the palace. He added that, first of all, before the meeting, he would like to talk to the president. The procurator's orders were executed fast and precisely. The sun did not manage to reach its height and start to burn Jerusalem. The procurator and the president of the Sanhedrin, the high priest of Judea Joseph Caiaphas, met on the upper terrace of the garden near the marble lions guarding the staircase. It was quiet in the garden. They moved from the colonnade into the sun-drenched upper terrace of the garden, surrounded with the palms on their monstrous elephant-like legs. From that terrace, the procurator watched the city Jerusalem, which he detested. Suspended bridges, fortresses, and the eye-catching, undescribable Jerusalem temple roof of the lamp marble with a golden dragon scale. The procurator heard cries or groans somewhere far below, divided from the stone wall in the lower palace garden terraces from the city square. He thought that sounds were made by numerous crowds of excited citizens. That crowd was impatiently waiting for the sentence, and sellers offered to buy some water. The procurator invited the priest to the balcony to escape unbearable heat, but Caiaphas politely refused and explained he could not do that. Pilate pulled his cowl on his balding hand and started talking in Greek. Pilate said he examined Joshua's Hanotri case and set a death sentence. Thus, 3 robbers were expected for the execution: Dismas, Hestus, Barabbas, and that Joshua Hanotri. The first 2 called up people to rebel against the Caesar and were captured by the Roman authorities, so the procurator was in charge for them. That's why they were not the subject for the discussion. Barabbas and Hanotri were arrested by the local authorities and convicted by the Sanhedrin. According to the law and tradition, one of these criminals should be released in favor of the approaching feast of Passover. The procurator wanted to know whom Sanhedrin was going to release, Barabbas or Hanotri. Caiaphas bowed his head, showing that he understood the question, and replied, Sanhedrin requests to release Barabbas. The procurator knew the priest replied beforehand, but he needed to show a great effect of astonishment. Pilate did it successfully. His eyebrows raised on his proud face, he looked at the priest with amazement. I confess it amazes me, softly began the procurator. I'm afraid there is some misunderstanding. He explained. Roman authority did not wish to claim the rights of the local religious power. It was rather clear to the priest. But in this case, the mistake was evident. Roman government took interest to correct the error. Barabbas and Hanotri's crimes were different in their gravity. The second was evidently an insane person, and his guilt was in his silly speeches in Jerusalem and other cities. The first one was convicted for more serious crimes. He made direct attempts to rebel, killed the guard, resisting during his arrest. Barabbas was more dangerous. Everything mentioned there before made Pilate ask Caiaphas to compare these robbers and change decision. Caiaphas looked directly at Pilate and said quietly but firmly that Sanhedrin investigated the case and repeated for the second time they would like to release Barabbas. Why? Even after my petition? After petition of the person who represents Roman government? High priest, repeat for the third time. For the third time we inform you that we are going to release Barabbas, quietly answered Caiaphas. It was over. Nothing was to discuss. Hanotri was forever gone. The procurator's horrible headaches would stay forever. There would be no remedy for them, except death. However, this thought didn't impress Pilate. The same sorrow, piercing all his being on the balcony, appeared again. He tried to explain that, but the explanation was also strange. It seemed to the procurator he did not listen to the prisoner up to the end, or did not tell him something important. Pilate banished that thought, and it flew away like it occurred. It passed, but some sorrow was keeping mysterious, and he couldn't explain it with another rapidly lightening thought. Immortality. Imminent immortality. Whose immortality? The procurator did not understand it, but the thought made him freeze in the sunlight. Well, said Pilate, Let it be. He turned around, looked upon the visible world, and noticed some change. The rose bush, cypresses lining on the upper terrace, pomegranate tree, a statue in green itself, everything disappeared. Dense purple mass swayed with waved seaweed. Pilate was drowning in it. He was seized with a great suffocating burning rage of impotence. "I'm suffocating," said Pilate. "Suffocating." He tore a buckle from the collar with a damp, cold hand, and it fell down on the sand. "It's different today. There's some storm," responded Caiaphas, gazing at a blood-red procurator's face and thinking of the future torments. "This year the sun is terrible." "No," said Pilate. "I am suffocating. I feel stifled by your presence, Caiaphas." And narrowing his eyes, smiled and added, "Take care of yourself, High Priest. Beware." High Priest's dark eyes sparkled, and he showed amazement no worse than the procurator did before. "What am I hearing, procurator?" proudly and calmly replied Caiaphas. "Are you threatening me after your own sentence?" "How can it be? We've got used that the Roman procurator chooses his words before speaking out loud. Suppose we are overheard, Hegemon?" Pilate looked at the high priest with blank eyes, and grinning he produced a smile. "Come on, high priest, who can overhear us? Am I a crazy young vagrant who is executed today? Am I green, Caiaphas? I know that I am acting my age. Garden, palace are cordoned, so that not a mouse would appear, not a mouse, not even that person of Kerioth. You do know him, high priest, well enough, don't you? If he broke into, he would have bitterly regretted. You believe these words of mine, don't you? I tell you, you wouldn't be safe, since now neither you nor your people." Pilate pointed to the right, where the temple was flashing up to the top. "I am giving you my word, Pontius Pilate, the Knight of the Golden Lance." "I know it," fiercely answered the black-bearded Caiaphas, and his eyes sparkled. He raised his hand to the sky and kept on. "The Jewish people know how you hate them, and they know you will bring a lot of sufferings to them. But you will never destroy us. God will protect us. He will hear us. Powerful Caesar will hear us and protect us from Pilate the oppressor." "Oh, no," cried Pilate while speaking. He got more and more relief. He did not have to pretend to pick up the words. "You've been complaining to me too much to Caesar. My hour has come. I will write, but not to Antioch Viceroy and not to Rome. I will write to the Emperor, straight to Capraea, that here in Jerusalem you are hiding rebels from death. I would not give you water to drink out of Solomon's pool, as I intended for your well-being. No, it would not be water to drink. Make your memory right, High Priest, when I had to remove Imperial Caesar's shields from the walls, transfer troops because of you. I had to come up to investigate your problems. Remember my words, High Priest. You would see more than one cohorse in Jerusalem. There would come the whole fulminant legio, Arabian cavalry. You would hear cries and lamentations. That time you would recollect Barabbas whom you rescued, and the peaceful philosopher sentenced to death." High Priest's face went flax. Eyes glittered. He smiled grimly like Procurator and said, "Do you believe your own words, Procurator? No, you don't. Do you realize, Knight? You do realize perfectly well that this seducer hasn't brought peace to the people of Jerusalem. You wanted to reveal him, to make people doubt, abuse our faith, and make people join Roman swords. But I am the High Priest of Jerusalem, being alive, will defend faith and protect people. You hear it, Pilate?" Caiaphas threateningly raised his hand. "Listen, Procurator." Caiaphas was silent, and the procurator heard noise like sea waves rolling at the bottom of Herod the Great palace. That noise grew to the procurator's feet and face. In the outhouses of the palace behind, he heard trumpet calls, heavy crunch of 100 leads, and metal clank. It meant infantry marched to the execution parade for the rebels and robbers. "You hear, procurator?" repeated high priest in a loud voice. "You can't say it was caused." He raised hands and his dark cowl slipped off his head. "By the miserable robber Barabbas." Procurator wiped his damp cold forehead with his back over his wrist, stared at the ground, then frowning skywards, he saw that burning ball of the sun climbing over his head, and Caiaphas' shadow shrank and uttered in a calm and expressionless voice, "It's noon soon. We've enjoyed our conversation, but there are things to be finished." Apologizing, he invited the high priest to sit down on a bench in magnolia shade, and waited when all the people appeared for the last meeting, and instructed one more person before the execution. Caiaphas politely bowed, placing his hand onto his heart, and stayed in the garden, while Pilate returned to the balcony. He ordered the secretary to invite the legate legio, co-host tribune, two Sanhedrin members, and the captain of the temple guard, who was expected on the lower terrace near the fountain in the garden. Pilate added he would come up soon and entered the palace. While the secretary arranged this meeting, procurator was talking to a person whose face was half hid with the hood in a dark curtained room, so that sunlight wouldn't disturb them. That conversation was rather short. The procurator told the person some words, then he disappeared, and Pilate came back to the garden. In the presence of all the people whom he intended to see, the procurator solemnly repeated his sentence and officially inquired Sanhedrin whom they were going to release. The answer was Barabbas. "Very well," said the procurator, and ordered the secretary to fix it in the minutes. He clutched the buckle which the secretary had picked from the sand and announced, "It's time." Everybody sat down. The marble staircase between rose bushes exuded maddening odor, going down to the palace wall, to the gates leading to the paved square, at the end of which there were seen columns and statues of hippodrome. As soon as the group entered the square, went up on a broad stone platform spreading over the square, Pilate figured out the situation through his narrowed eyelids. The space from the palace up to the platform was empty. He did not see anything ahead. The crowd devoured. They might pour to the platform and the passage, but for the triple row of Sebastian soldiers from the left and auxiliary Ituren cohorts from the right. So Pilate stepped to the platform, seizing useless buckle and frowning. The reason for procurator's frowning was not the sunlight hitting into his face. He was not inclined to see the convicted persons who were led to the platform behind him. Hardly had a white cloak with a blood-red lining appeared on the top of the stone block on the edge of a human sea, a wave, struck Pilate's ear. It began softly, near the hippodrome, and then turned, thunder-like for some seconds, and lowered down. "They have seen me," thought the procurator. The wave did not decrease, and began growing again, rose higher. Then at first the second wave brought whistles, hardly audible through the noise, women's shrieks, just like foam on the sea shaft. "They are on the platform," thought Pilate. Women screamed. They were crushed in the first rouse. He waited for a while, knowing that nothing would make the crowd quiet, till it breathed out all his power and got silent on its own. When the moment came, the procurator held his right hand out up, and the last noise was gone. Pilate took as deep breath as he could, and his stained voice flew over the square. In the name of the Emperor Caesar. His ears were struck with the immediate metal roar. The soldiers on the cohorts raised up their lances and responded, "Viva Caesar!" Pilate buried his head up into the sun. A bright green fire splashed onto his eyelids, pierced into his brain, and he started to cry out Aramaic words. 4 criminals were arrested in Jerusalem for murders, incitement to the rebellion, contempt of the law, and blasphemy, and was sentenced to the most shameful execution, crucifixion. This execution will take place at the Calvary. Here are Dismas, Hestus, Barabbas, and Hanotri. Pilate pointed to the right into the direction of the criminals he could not see, but he was aware they were there. The mass responded with a rumble of surprise or relief. When it faded away, Pilate went on. According to the tradition, only 3 of them will be executed, and by custom, in honor of the great Passover, one of them will be released by the lesser Sanhedrin decision. Roman power has to approve to give back his compatible life. Pilate rasped out the words and listened to the great silence. Neither breath nor rustle reached his ears. It seemed to Pilate that the detested city died out, and he was the only one under the heating open sunlight. Pilate drawled silence and shouted, "The name of the one to be released." He paused, holding the name, checking if he had said everything as he knew. After pronouncing the name, the city would resurrect, greet a lucky man, and the rest of the speech wouldn't be audible. Everything, whispered Pilate to himself. Everything. The name. Rolling with R over the silent city, he rode, "Barabbas!" He felt the sun exploded and flew with fire into his ears. That place was roaring, shrieking, groaning, whistle, laughing all around. Pilate turned around and came back to the staircase, not looking at the colorful blocks, to save from stumbling. He knew that behind his back, dates and bronze coins were showering onto the platform. People were climbing onto the shoulders to say a miracle. Being on the edge of death, a person was torn from its arms. The legio soldiers untied his bonds, making his swollen arms ache with pleasure. He grimaced and smiled with a senseless, insane smile. Pilate knew that escort was marching 3 sentenced men to the steps of the platform to lead them to the road westward to the Calvary. Pilate opened his eyes only behind the platform. He was safe. He would not see the convicted persons. As the roar came down, the separate voices repeated the procurator's speech in Hebrew and Greek. The procurator caught the sounds of horses' hoofs and calls of trumpet. The sounds echoed with the piercing whistles of the boys from the roofs on the market to the hippodrome, and with the shouts, "Look!" A lonely soldier, standing on the empty square, gave a signal of warning, and then the procurator, legio legate, the secretary, and the escort stopped. The cavalry ala flew onto the square at a trot. Crossing it and passing near some group, people stepped to the side street along the vine-covered stone wall to gallop on to Calvary by the shortest route. Ella commander was a Syrian, as small as a boy and as dark as a mulatto, cried and drew his sword. A sweating horse snorted and reared. The commander struck his horse's neck with the whip, brought 4 leagues down, and galloped to the side street. Horsemen followed him in columns in dust. Bamboo lances, tips bobbed rhythmically. They went past procurator with their faces unnaturally dark in contrast to their white turbans. They were grinning joyfully, and their teeth whitened in the dust. Raising a cloud of dust, they rushed to the side street. The last trooper was carrying a trumpet behind him. Shielding from the dust with his hand, throwing his face, Pilate was walking towards the palace garden gates, followed by the legate, secretary, and escort. It was at about 10 o'clock in the morning.